The room was filled with the quiet ticking of an old clock, the kind of sound that became louder the more alone you were. The woman lay half propped on her bed, thin hands resting on a faded blanket, her breath shallow and uneven. The doctor had been honest without being cruel. Time was short. Days blended together now, marked only by medication schedules and the changing light that crept across the walls. What kept her awake was not pain, but silence. Silence and the weight of memories that had no one left to listen to them. The window beside her bed had become her world. From there she could see the small courtyard between the gray apartment blocks, a tired playground, 2 benches with peeling paint, and a narrow strip of earth where grass stubbornly pushed through cracks. She watched people pass through it like fleeting scenes from a place she no longer belonged to. Mothers dragging tired children home, teenagers glued to their phones, an old man walking his dog at the same hour every evening. None of them noticed her, and she did not expect them to. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low and painted the walls in soft gold, movement caught her eye. A little girl had entered the courtyard, no more than 5 or 6 years old. She wore a red jacket much too big for her, the sleeves covering her hands, and her hair was tied into 2 uneven ponytails. The child ran toward the swing, pushed it clumsily, then climbed on and began to sway, laughing at the simple rhythm. Her laughter floated up to the window, light and clear, cutting through the old woman's chest like a forgotten melody. The woman felt something stir inside her, something she had not felt in years. She leaned closer to the glass, ignoring the ache in her bones. The girl's face glowed with life. Scraped knees, bright eyes, the fearless trust of someone who believed the world would catch her if she fell. Tears welled in the woman's eyes before she understood why. She had once dreamed of grandchildren, of small hands in hers, of stories read aloud before bed. Life, however, had taken different turns, and those dreams had quietly withered. "If I had a granddaughter like that," she whispered to the empty room, her voice barely more than breath, "I would live a little longer." The words surprised even her. She closed her eyes, ashamed of the thought, as if she had tempted fate by wishing for more time. The next day, she found herself waiting for the afternoon without realizing it. She watched the courtyard from morning onward, growing restless each time someone passed who was not the girl. When the red jacket finally appeared again, relief washed over her like warmth. This time, the child noticed the window. She stopped mid-step, squinting upward, curious about the pale face behind the glass. The old woman hesitated, then slowly raised her hand. It trembled, but she lifted it anyway and gave a small wave. To her astonishment, the girl grinned and waved back with enthusiasm, her whole arm swinging. Laughter bubbled out of her, and she spun around as if sharing a secret joke with the sky. The woman laughed too, a soft, broken sound she hardly recognized as her own. From that day on, they looked for each other. The girl would come to the courtyard, glance up, and wave. Sometimes she held up a flower she had picked, sometimes a drawing on crumpled paper. The woman responded with smiles, with nods, with exaggerated expressions that made the child giggle. Words were unnecessary. Across the glass and the distance, something gentle grew, a fragile thread connecting 2 lonely souls. The woman's nurses noticed a change. She asked to sit up more often, insisted the curtains stay open. She even began to eat a little more, just enough to surprise those who had watched her fade. At night, when the pain returned, she thought of the girl's laughter and found herself enduring a little better. The hours no longer felt like enemies closing in, but like borrowed gifts. The child, too, seemed to linger longer in the courtyard. Often she sat alone, pushing a toy car along the ground or talking to herself. Once, when the woman looked closely, she noticed the girl's smile did not always reach her eyes. On a cold evening, the child stood below the window longer than usual, hugging herself, as if reluctant to go back inside wherever home was. Days later, there was a knock at the door. The woman startled. No one visited without warning anymore. A nurse opened it, then stepped aside, confused. The little girl stood there, red jacket zipped crookedly, holding a folded piece of paper. "She said she knows you," the nurse murmured, unsure. From the window, the woman's heart raced. For a moment she feared the child would vanish like a dream if she blinked. But the girl was real, warm, breathing, her eyes wide with curiosity as she stepped into the room. I drew you, the child said proudly, unfolding the paper. Crayon lines formed a window, a stick figure with white hair, and a bright yellow sun. You look lonely. The woman could not speak. She reached out, and the girl took her hand without hesitation. The touch was small, firm, alive. Something inside the woman cracked open, and tears slid freely down her cheeks. She did not bother to hide them. From then on, the girl visited whenever she could. Sometimes with a quick hello, sometimes with stories about school, about dreams, about things only children thought important. The woman listened as if every word were precious. She told the girl stories too, about winters long past, about kindness and mistakes, about love that did not always last but always mattered. Time did not stop. The woman grew weaker, her voice softer. But she was no longer afraid. When the girl sat beside her, tracing patterns on the blanket, the room felt full. Full of warmth, of meaning. The old woman understood then that life was not measured only by years, but by moments like these. One evening, as the sun set and painted the room gold once more, the woman squeezed the girl's hand gently. You gave me a reason, she whispered. The child frowned, not fully understanding, and leaned closer. For what? She asked. For staying a little longer, the woman replied, smiling. Outside, the courtyard was quiet. Inside, love had found its place. Brief, unexpected, and enough. The ticking of the clock was steady, almost stubborn, as if it alone refused to accept how fragile everything else in the room had become. It hung on the wall opposite the bed, its wooden frame darkened by decades of sunlight and dust. The old woman often found herself staring at it, counting the seconds not because she feared them, but because they reminded her she was still here. Each tick meant another breath taken, another moment borrowed. Her body felt lighter than it should have, as though parts of her had already begun to drift away. The blankets seemed heavier every day, pressing her down, keeping her anchored to a bed she rarely left now. Nurses came and went, kind but hurried, their smiles professional, their words carefully chosen. They spoke softly, as if loud voices might break her. She thanked them, always polite, always grateful, but when the door closed behind them, the silence returned, thick and unyielding. She had outlived almost everyone who once filled her life. Friends, relatives, even neighbors who used to knock just to chat had slowly disappeared. Some moved away, some passed on, some simply forgot. There was no bitterness left in her about it. Only a dull ache, like an old scar that never quite faded. Loneliness, she had learned, was not about being alone. It was about having no one left who needed you. The window beside her bed was the one thing she insisted remain uncovered. The nurses suggested closing it against the cold, against the glare, but she refused. From that window, she could see the small courtyard below, and through it, the quiet continuation of life. It was her connection to a world she could no longer step into. The courtyard was unremarkable. A tired swing set that squeaked in protest, a slide with chipped paint, two benches where the elderly sometimes rested. In spring, weeds pushed through the cracks in the pavement, stubborn and green. In winter, snow gathered in uneven patches, trampled into gray slush by passing feet. Yet to her, it was a stage, and every passerby played a role, however brief. That afternoon, the sunlight was warm despite the season, spilling through the window and resting on her blanket. She was half asleep when a sound reached her ears that did not belong to the usual rhythm of the courtyard. Laughter. Clear, ringing, untouched by worry. It startled her awake. She turned her head slowly toward the window and saw the little girl. The child stood near the swings, her red jacket standing out sharply against the dull colors around her. It was too big, clearly passed down, the sleeves swallowing her hands. Her boots were scuffed, her hat pulled low over her ears. She pushed the swing with all her might, climbed onto it, and began to rock back and forth, laughing as if the simple motion were the greatest joy she had ever known. The old woman felt her chest tighten. The girl's laughter filled something inside her that had been empty for years. She watched intently, afraid that if she blinked, the child would vanish like a mirage. There was something achingly familiar in the way the girl moved, in the carefree trust with which she threw herself into the air. Memories surfaced uninvited. A younger version of herself, dreams still intact. Hopes for a family, for grandchildren whose birthdays she would bake cakes for, whose scraped knees she would kiss better. Life, however, had followed another path, one shaped by loss, missed chances, and long, quiet years. Those dreams had faded so gradually that she hardly noticed when they were gone. Her eyes burned with sudden tears. She pressed her thin fingers against the glass, feeling its coldness seep into her skin. "If I had a granddaughter like that," she murmured, her voice trembling, "I would live a little longer." The words escaped before she could stop them. She did not know whether it was a prayer or a confession. The girl eventually ran off, called by someone out of sight. The courtyard returned to its usual stillness, but the room no longer felt quite the same. Something had shifted, subtle but undeniable. That night, as pain throbbed through her joints and sleep refused to come, she found herself smiling in the dark, replaying the sound of that laughter over and over. The next day, she woke earlier than usual. The clock ticked on, indifferent, but she was alert, expectant. She asked the nurse to help her sit up and made sure the window was clear. She told herself she was being foolish, that children came and went, that she should not hope. Yet when the red jacket appeared again in the courtyard, her heart fluttered like that of a young girl herself. This time, the child noticed her. She stopped abruptly, tilting her head as she peered upward, her eyes narrowing against the sun. The old woman hesitated, suddenly shy, then lifted her hand in a small, uncertain wave. The girl's face broke into a grin so wide it seemed to light up the entire courtyard. She waved back enthusiastically, hopping on her feet as if greeting an old friend. Her laughter floated upward, warm and infectious. The old woman laughed too, surprised by the sound, surprised that it came from her at all. From that moment on, a silent ritual formed between them. Every afternoon, the woman watched for the red jacket. Every afternoon it appeared, as if summoned by her thoughts. They waved to each other, exchanged exaggerated expressions, shared moments that belonged only to them. Sometimes the girl held up a flower, sometimes a toy, once even a drawing pressed proudly against the glass. The woman began to live by those moments. The pain did not disappear, nor did the weakness, but they became easier to bear. She asked for fewer painkillers, insisted on staying awake until the girl left the courtyard. The nurses noticed her appetite improve, her eyes brighter, her voice stronger. They exchanged puzzled glances but said nothing. The girl, meanwhile, lingered longer each day. Often she played alone, her laughter fading into quiet murmurs as she talked to her toys. The woman noticed the way the child sometimes glanced toward the building entrance, as if expecting someone who did not come. There was a loneliness there too, one that mirrored her own in an unexpected way. One evening, as the sky darkened and the cold crept in, the girl stood beneath the window longer than usual. She hugged herself, rocking slightly, and waved one last time before disappearing inside. The woman felt a pang of worry she could not explain. 2 days later, there was a knock at the door. It was a soft knock, hesitant. The nurse who opened it looked surprised, then confused. A small figure stood in the doorway, red jacket zipped crookedly, hair peeking out from under a knitted hat. She held a folded piece of paper in both hands. "She says she knows you," the nurse said quietly. From the window, the old woman's heart raced. For a moment she wondered if this was a dream, conjured by longing. But when the girl stepped inside, her boots thumping softly against the floor, reality settled in. "I drew you," the girl announced proudly, unfolding the paper. Crayon lines revealed a window, a small bed, and a stick figure with white hair waving from inside. A bright yellow sun hovered overhead. "You looked sad. So I wanted to make you happy." The woman's vision blurred. She reached out, her hand trembling, and the girl took it without hesitation. Her hand was warm, solid, alive. A sob escaped the woman before she could stop it. She did not bother to wipe the tears away. From then on, the girl visited often. Sometimes only for a few minutes, sometimes longer, sitting on the edge of the bed, swinging her legs. She talked endlessly. About school, about dreams where she could fly, about how her mother worked a lot and was always tired. The woman listened with rapt attention, responding with stories of her own past, softened and reshaped for young ears. As days passed, the woman grew weaker. Her voice faded, her movements slowed. But fear no longer clung to her the way it once had. When the girl was there, the room felt full, alive with meaning. The old woman understood now that love did not always come in the ways one expected. Sometimes it arrived late, brief, and fragile, and sometimes that was enough. One evening, bathed in the same golden light that had first revealed the girl to her, the woman squeezed the small hand resting in hers. "You gave me a reason," she whispered. The girl frowned, puzzled, then leaned closer. "For what?" "For staying," the woman replied softly. "For smiling." The child smiled back, wide and bright. Outside, the courtyard lay quiet. Inside, two souls shared a moment that would outlast time itself. The clock on the wall had been ticking for so many years that its sound had become part of the room itself, like the faint hum of electricity or the distant noise of traffic beyond the building. For the old woman lying in the narrow bed, the ticking was both a comfort and a reminder. It told her she was still here, still breathing, still part of time, even as her body slowly loosened its grip on the world. Her room was small and carefully kept, though no one visited often enough to notice. A faded rug lay beside the bed, its pattern worn thin where feet had once crossed it daily. On the dresser stood a few framed photographs, their edges yellowed, people smiling into a past that felt impossibly far away. She rarely looked at them anymore. Memories, she had learned, could be as painful as they were sweet. The nurses came regularly. They spoke kindly, adjusted pillows, checked drips, and reminded her to drink water. They did their best, and she was grateful, but when they left, the silence returned like a heavy blanket. Silence had become her closest companion. At first, it had frightened her. Later, she had grown used to it. Still, some evenings it pressed so hard on her chest that breathing felt more difficult than it should. What she asked for most insistently was that the window remain uncovered. The nurses worried about drafts and glare, but she would not give in. The window was her only bridge to the world beyond the bed. Through it, she could see the courtyard between the apartment buildings, a modest square of cracked pavement, tired trees, and aging playground equipment. It was nothing special, yet it pulsed with life in small, ordinary ways. She watched people come and go, often recognizing patterns. The elderly man with the limping dog appeared every evening at the same time. A young couple argued quietly on a bench, then disappeared together into the stairwell. Teenagers passed through in noisy clusters, then vanished. She watched them all like chapters in a book she could no longer read aloud. On one particular afternoon, when the sunlight poured into the room with unexpected warmth, something different happened. She had been dozing lightly, drifting between sleep and wakefulness, when a sound reached her that did not belong to the usual rhythm of the courtyard. It was laughter, high, bright, and completely unburdened. Her eyes opened at once. She turned her head slowly toward the window, her movements careful, her body fragile. In the courtyard below, a small girl stood near the swings. The child wore a red jacket far too big for her, the sleeves covering her hands. Her hair was tied into uneven ponytails, and her boots were scuffed from use. She pushed the swing with all her strength, climbed onto it, and began to rock back and forth, laughing as if the air itself were lifting her. The old woman felt her throat tighten. The girl's laughter rose up to the window, cutting through the stale quiet of the room like fresh air. She leaned closer to the glass, pressing her palm against it, feeling its coldness seep into her skin. For a long moment, she simply watched, afraid to move, afraid the scene would vanish. Something deep inside her stirred, something she thought had long since gone silent. The sight of the child awakened memories she had buried gently over the years. Dreams of family, of small hands reaching for hers, of bedtime stories and shared secrets. She had once imagined grandchildren running through her home, filling it with noise and life. But life had unfolded differently. Loss had come early, chances had slipped away, and slowly, without drama, those dreams had faded. Her eyes filled with tears. She did not wipe them away. "If I had a granddaughter like that," she whispered to the empty room, her voice thin but sincere, "I would live a little longer." The words surprised her. She had not meant to say them aloud. She closed her eyes, embarrassed by her own longing, as if she had asked the universe for too much. When she opened them again, the girl was gone, called away by someone out of sight. The courtyard returned to its usual stillness. But the room was no longer the same. That night, pain woke her again and again, but each time she drifted back to sleep with the echo of laughter in her ears. For the first time in a long while, she smiled in the dark. The next morning, she woke earlier than usual. She asked the nurse to help her sit up and made sure the window was clear. She told herself she was being foolish, that children came and went, that she should not hope for anything more. Yet her eyes kept returning to the courtyard, searching. In the afternoon, the red jacket appeared again. Her heart skipped, and she laughed softly at herself. The girl ran into the courtyard, stopped abruptly, and looked up. For a moment, they simply stared at each other. The old woman felt suddenly shy, then raised her hand in a small, tentative wave. The girl's face lit up. She waved back with her whole arm, hopping in place as if greeting someone she had known forever. Her laughter floated upward again, warm and familiar. The old woman laughed too, the sound surprising her with its strength. From that day on, an unspoken ritual formed between them. Every afternoon, the woman waited by the window. Every afternoon, the girl appeared, as if answering a silent call. They waved, smiled, and made faces at each other. Sometimes the girl held up a flower she had picked. Sometimes she pressed a drawing against the glass, proud and eager. The woman responded with exaggerated nods and wide smiles, communicating more with her eyes than with words. The hours between visits felt longer than the hours during them. The woman found herself enduring the pain more patiently, the nights less frightening. She ate a little more. She asked for fewer painkillers. The nurses noticed the change and exchanged puzzled looks, but they did not question it. Whatever was keeping her spirit alive was working. The girl, too, began to linger longer in the courtyard. Often she played alone, pushing a toy along the ground or sitting on a bench, swinging her legs. The woman noticed how the child sometimes glanced toward the building entrance, waiting, hoping. There was loneliness there, subtle but unmistakable. It mirrored her own. One cold evening, the girl stood beneath the window longer than usual. She hugged herself and waved several times before finally disappearing inside. The woman felt a strange unease, a worry she could not explain. 2 days passed without the red jacket appearing. The woman's chest felt heavy with disappointment she tried to dismiss. On the third day, there was a knock at the door. It was soft and uncertain. The nurse who opened it looked surprised, then stepped aside. A small figure stood in the doorway, clutching a folded piece of paper. The red jacket was zipped crookedly, her hat pulled low. "She says she knows you," the nurse said quietly. From the window, the woman's heart raced. For a moment, she wondered if she was dreaming. But the girl stepped into the room, her boots tapping softly against the floor. "I drew you," the girl said, unfolding the paper. Crayon lines showed a window, a bed, and a stick figure waving. A bright yellow sun filled the corner. "You looked sad." The woman reached out with trembling hands. The girl took one without hesitation. Her hand was warm, alive. Tears streamed down the woman's face, unchecked. From that day on, the girl visited often. Sometimes she came alone, sometimes with a distracted mother who waited in the hallway. She sat on the edge of the bed, talking endlessly about school, about dreams, about little things that mattered deeply to her. The woman listened, as if each word were a gift. She shared her own stories too, carefully chosen, filled with warmth rather than regret. As time passed, the woman grew weaker. Her voice faded, her movements slowed. But fear no longer ruled her nights. The room felt full now, rich with meaning. One evening, bathed in golden light, the woman squeezed the small hand resting in hers. "You gave me a reason," she whispered. "For what?" the girl asked, frowning. "For staying a little longer," the woman replied, smiling. The girl smiled back. Outside, the courtyard lay quiet. Inside, love had found its way home.